This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell?
What the hell is going on is Barton Swaim has a great piece in the Wall Street Journal called Why Democrats Can't Quit Trump. And this is something you've been talking about on this podcast for a while, which is why I suggested bring him on, is because you've been talking about how the Democrats just love Donald Trump.
They do.
They say they hate Donald Trump, but they love Donald Trump. They miss the Trump years. It was the golden age of the left when they could stand up to the evil of Donald Trump and all the rest of it. They wanted him to be the nominee, and they've got their wish. And tell me what you think.
No, look, I thought his piece was really spot on. And it is a testament to the bankruptcy of both parties. I said this the other day in a Substack, and I really think it's true and probably needs even more examination than we afford it today on the podcast. But the problems with the Republican Party, the bickering inside the Republican Party, the internecine sort of kindergarten, I hate you, now I hate you more bullshit that's been going
Rhino.
But all of that really infantile behavior has masked a real weakness inside the Democratic Party as well, right? The Democrats love Trump, can't quit Trump, and the reason is Trump enables them to paper over their own problems, right? What Donald Trump means is we don't have to talk about what's wrong with Kamala Harris. We don't have to talk about the fact that actually after Joe Biden, we don't really have a bench, right? We got one or two people who might be okay, and a lot of people who could not get elected dog catcher if it were a nationwide vote. And I think that this has become a weakness in which you and I talk about ourselves, they talk about us, and nobody talks about the Democrats. And it's really interesting.
And that's why Joe Biden is the nominee, is because, it wasn't because, the guy who, first ran in 1988 for president and had to pull out because of a plagiarism scandal and then got 10% or less when he ran again a few years later in 2008 against Barack Obama. It's not like this guy was a political force of nature. He was just the genial, moderate-seeming guy who could be the Trojan horse to let them get back into power. And the reason why he's still on the ballot is they don't have an alternative.
Right. And look, a lot of Democrats with integrity, our friends, will absolutely admit to the fact that the Democratic Party is absolutely lost, that it has become an elitist party. We've talked many times to Rui Teixeira. He has a three-part series that's going on right now in the Liberal Patriot that I really, really like, which is three key recommendations he's making to the party. The second one, which just came out this last weekend, was about how Democrats need to re-embrace patriotism. But the fact that you need to tell the party of the President of the United States that they need to re-embrace patriotism tells you that there's some sort of really deep-seated problem.
And the other thing that it does is Trump has enabled their inner authoritarians to shine, right? Trump is the excuse for knocking off all the norms, right? The media doesn't have to be even-handed anymore because being even-handed and presenting Trump's arguments is somehow enabling him. And so therefore we can just be as biased as our hearts really want us to be. And we always sort of had to resist a little bit because we were out of a sense of fairness. Well, we don't have to be fair to Donald Trump anymore. Or in the Senate, let's get rid of the filibuster because he packed the Supreme Court and say with all these conservatives. So we'll pack it back and we'll expand the Supreme Court. Or, we'll use lawfare to go against him and file, I said on Fox the other day, 91 indictments. Charles Manson had 10. 91 indictments. Some of them may be legit, but not most of them all. And oh, by the way, let's bankrupt him with civil lawsuits. Like Letitia James going and campaigning on saying she's going to be Donald Trump's worst nightmare. And let's use the 14th Amendment to try and kick him off the ballot and see if we can get that past the Supreme Court. It's like they've become everything they criticize. about Donald Trump. They have embraced. And truthfully, Danny, I was appalled by January 6th and all the rest of it, but you know what? Our institutions held, our guardrails are what protected our democracy then. And they want to destroy the guardrails. And that's a bigger threat than Trump coming back to the White House for 4 years. If we destroy those guardrails, Trump just came out with a statement today on abortion. And he basically said, leave it to the states. Don't bring it back to Congress. And the truth is, so that's the right policy, and we can get into, I don't want to get into an abortion discussion here, but because there's no way you can get 60 votes to change abortion laws one way or another right now. Republicans are giving a false promise to the pro-life movement by saying we'll have a 15-week ban at the federal level, and Democrats have a false promise by saying we're going to codify Roe v. Wade. It's never going to happen because you can't get 60 votes in the Senate. Well, guess what? If the Democrats get away with taking back the Senate and getting rid of the filibuster, every few years the abortion policy is going to swing from side to side like the old Mexico City policy did, because you'll only need 50 votes to change it. It's like these are basic guardrails that our founding fathers and our system has put in place to prevent the extremes from hijacking our political system, and they want to remove those. That is so dangerous to our democracy. So I'm particularly worried about how anti-Trumpism is actually in many ways more of a threat to democracy than Trump.
Well, we've had this conversation before. I mean, and I don't get it. As my kids always say to me, "¿Por qué no los dos?"
Your kids speak Spanish to you?
Well, "Por qué no los dos?" It must come from something, but I don't know the provenance of it. But basically,
I thought they just said, crikey, it's a crock. Raise a sharp teeth.
yeah, they say that too, Mark. But that comes from the Aussie passport. But for me, it's a pox on both their houses. I'm never, as I've told you, I am one of those people who is never going back to Donald Trump. 100% for sure. Hey, you and I agreed after we interviewed our guest that we spent a lot of time talking about ourselves and that we shouldn't talk about ourselves in the beginning of our intro. And that always we talk about ourselves. So why don't we introduce our guest so he can talk about us? That's what matters. I'm sure the name is familiar to everybody, all of our listeners, because he is an editorial page writer at the Wall Street Journal. Barton Swaim has been there since 2018. He writes a regular column on political books, but in this case, we really love the column that he wrote called "Why Democrats Can't Quit Trump," and we'll link to that. He's been an opinion editor at the Weekly Standard, and he wrote a book called, and Mark, I can't believe you didn't ask him about this, called "The Speechwriter: A Brief Education in Politics." We'll get that next time.
Here's our interview. Well, Barton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me very much.
It's so great to have you here. So you've written this great piece in the Journal, "Why Democrats Can't Quit Trump." And you said, "I suspect, if I could speak uncharitably, that many Democrats secretly miss the Trump years." Tell us why you think the Democrats missed the Trump years.
Well, look, the Trump years were pretty good for the left. During the first couple of years, at least, I think donations to progressive nonprofits went up by like tens of millions of dollars. That's one thing. Trump's admittedly idiotic rhetoric, I think, gave many people on the left, activists for sure, but politicians themselves, academics, entertainers, a kind of moral license to break the rules, to break norms. And let's admit it, that's kind of fun. I mean, in some ways, the left had the best of both worlds during the Trump years. On the one hand, they had significant political power and 90% of what I would call cultural power. The universities, the bureaucracies, the entertainment industry, all the rest. On the other hand, they could make a plausible case that they were the embattled minority. The dictator had taken power, the progressives were on the run. He was going to crack down on press freedoms, remember all that? He was going to turn federal agencies into arms of the Republican Party, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was all very satisfying at a gut emotional level for many people, especially those in the political class. I have to say, Democrats did not like my saying this, that they enjoyed it. And maybe I was having a little too much fun psychologizing them from afar. But it sure looked to me like they were having a blast, fulminating against Trump at every opportunity, day after day. Most of the media, if I could speak ill of my own industry, cast aside whatever pretensions to fairness they had and became kind of propagandists. And it all looked like they were enjoying it to me. Was it worth losing the Supreme Court? Probably not. But hey, they can't lose it a second time. So yeah, that's what got me thinking about it.
So I'm going to start off with not a hard question, Barton. I'm so glad you're with us, but not with a hard question, but something you just made me think about in your opener. I'm a terrible fundraiser. You know, Mark and I work at a 501c3, right? We live off of donations that we raise every single year, 50, 60 million dollars. I don't envy our president, Robert Doar, at all for that job. But I was once with a very good fundraiser, a really a master of his art. And I realized suddenly why it was that he was so good at it. And it was because he made his interlocutors feel good about themselves. He used data, he used politics, but he made them feel good about themselves. And I think just as you were saying that, I think Donald Trump makes Democrats feel good about themselves. You know, when Joe Biden is president, they're, oh, God, we're so old, we're so lame. But when Donald Trump is president, it's like we're so handsome, we're so normal, we're so progressive. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's not a bad thing you're saying about them, actually. It's fascinating. What do you think of my theory, which is mine?
Yeah, and interestingly, Donald Trump makes a lot of Republicans feel really bad about themselves.
Also
So,
true, a double bonus.
yeah, for 4 years, I thought it was only going to be 4 years. Just when you could work yourself up into really hating the guy, the Democrats would do something again that was totally unfair, and you would have to go back defending him. It was so painful to have to, again and again, sort of defend a guy who was being treated unfairly when you didn't even like the guy. It was painful. Whereas now, Joe Biden is president, and look who the young spry ones are now. It's Republicans. So yeah, I think there is this weird reverse cockamamie psychology going on, and I don't enjoy it exactly, or maybe I do. But yeah, I totally think that Trump made a lot of Democrats feel really happy and good about themselves, good enough to go into the street and man the barricades and pretend to be dissidents in a dictatorship of some kind. It was all pretty fun.
With all the consequences of being in a dictatorship, like going to jail and,
Right,
and
exactly.
being Alexei Navalny and getting killed in a Siberian prison, right? All the good parts of dictatorship, none of the bad.
Yeah, still having tenured professorships that you're not in danger of losing. Yeah, it's not a bad way to spend a few years.
So, but I mean, the Democrats paint MAGA as this incredible threat to our democracy. I mean, Biden talks about it all the time. He gave that famous speech in front of Independence Hall, bathed in red light with the military guards, like to warning about how MAGA was a threat to our democracy. We're bringing back Jim Crow 2.0. We're making common cause with Confederates and with Bull Connor and all the rest of that stuff. And yet they've spent tens of millions of dollars trying to get MAGA candidates nominated in GOP primaries. It worked beautifully in the 2022 election. They just tried to do it again and successfully in Ohio. Do they not believe it? Is it just BS? Because why would you do that? I mean, if I thought Hitler was better to beat in an election, I probably still wouldn't be supporting him and hoping he gets nominated. If this guy's such a threat to democracy, why on earth would you risk having him as the nominee?
In a word, in my view, they do not believe it. And look, I'm from South Carolina, where bizarre political strategies are sort of the norm. I was just thinking back on all this. We had a guy named Rod Shealy. This guy was a Republican political consultant named Rod Shealy. He's dead now. He once recruited an unemployed fisherman to run against a Republican congressman, Arthur Ravenel, simply in order to boost Republican turnout and help his sister in the lieutenant governor's race. So, that's my state. He got caught for that and I think had to pay a fine. That's where I learned about politics. So, the sort of funding your opponents in this backhanded way of making it easier on you in the general, I'm not super offended by that. It's a little bit icky, but it's fair. If Republican voters are going to fall for it, that's on them. What I can't abide is Democrats then turning around and telling us that Trump and Trumpism mean the end of democracy and freedom and all that's good in the world. Which is it? Is helping Trump worth the risk of a few short-term political goals? Maybe. Or does helping Trump amount to a crime against democracy? It can't be both, right? So, no, I don't think they believe it, and I never did. Maybe a few, especially, Timothy Snyder and people like that, who were talking about brown shirts knocking at your door as soon as 2016 election happened. But by and large, especially in the political class, it's totally insincere.
But I mean, this is right. I guess there is a moral hazard question here, but I think you not unfairly suggest, okay, all is fair in love and war. You want to do this, and the Republican voters are dumb enough to fall for it. No, who is that on exactly? The voter or the people who choose to support them? Now, the hypocrisy question, I guess, I mean, the problem is that expectations are so low of our political leaders at this point that, labeling them as hypocrites for saying Trump is a threat to democracy, but we're going to embrace these tactics to support Trump in order to win. I guess it's a hard call. The real question here is, why do voters fall for this? Are voters so sheep-like that they're simply not paying attention? And if Chuck Schumer puts money into a race in support of the more MAGA guy in order to boost his own candidate, they just don't know it? Or is actually this just a better reflection? Would this happen even without the Democrats putting money in?
This is something I puzzle over, and I don't know the answer. I think part of it is that those of us on this podcast, we follow politics every day of the week. We think a lot about it. We know who the candidates are, what they think, and we are sort of weird in that way. And most people just are not paying attention, and rightly so, because they have jobs to do, they have lives, they have kids to worry about, and all the rest. And in their minds, they hear a guy running for Congress stand up and say a lot of things that they often think but don't say, and sort of express some feelings of angst and irritation that are sort of satisfying. And they think, okay, I like that guy. Maybe they don't think it through. Okay, he's going to lose in the general, or he's going to go to Washington and be completely ostracized because he can't get along with anybody. So I think a lot of it would happen even if Democrats weren't helping. Now, there are a few cases, I think, when it was pretty clear that Democrats put the candidate over the line. But, we live in a time when politics has become extremely performative, and a lot of it is sort of cathartic for voters, and people don't think strategically and probably ought to think a little more carefully about what they're doing. I'm hesitant to sort of blame voters. But again, we're talking about primary voters, and not many people vote in primaries. And the people who do vote in primaries, like us probably, are weird. And so maybe they think either too much or too little about politics. But it's a mystery to me. Like, how do people not know that, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, just to pick probably a cliched example, she's not going to make a difference in a way that is good for your side simply because of how extreme her language is. She's childish and kind of dumb.
Absolutely. Well, you don't believe in Jewish space lasers?
Chemtrails or whatever. Yeah, but a lot of it is probably born in frustration too. People are, in the burn it all down school of politics. They're sick of it. I have family members like this, and they're not dumb by any means, but they are so tired of A, the media, B, the political class, which seems dead set against on everything they believe, that they think, what the heck? I'll just vote for the person who's going to burn it all down and express my own angst and frustration with the whole situation.
No, I think you've put the nail on the head. That's exactly why a lot of people are voting these ways. Let's talk a little bit about our industry, the media. The Trump era seems to have damaged the media's credibility a lot more than Donald Trump's. Trust in the media has just tanked during the Trump era. And it stems a lot from, I think, there was the whole Russia collusion conspiracy theory, where, they spent years telling us that, Trump colluded with Russia to steal the election. And the Mueller report comes out, and it turns out not to be true. And then we come to to January 6th, where the president is telling us that the election is stolen, and people believe him. The media says, oh, no, it's not true. And no one believes them because they lied to us about the Russia collusion thing. So why should we believe them about this? I have a theory just that the Trump opposition has done more damage to our democracy than Trump has. Is that wrong?
I 100% believe that. No, I completely believe that. I know people, and you probably do too, who are ordinary, prosperous, well-educated, middle class, upper middle class people. They've been successful in life, but something happened, and in some cases it happened in the Obama years, with regard to the media, especially. And they no longer believe anything, any claim made by the media or the political class at all, even stuff that's pretty easy to believe. And it is shocking to me. They will link to obviously insane looking blogs that if you just looked at the interface, you would not believe anything on them, or looked at the, freedomeagle.com or something. And I am shocked that these people whom I know well believe this stuff. But when I think about it, it sort of makes sense. They're not dumb, but they have concluded, not without reason, that everything being told to them by what's commonly called, a term I don't like, commonly called the corporate media, is a complete lie. And so they're left without anything to believe except what looks unbelievable, looks outrageous. They figure that's probably true, and it's being covered up. I think there are more people out there like that than anybody is appreciating at this point. That's why I think RFK Jr. is maybe tapping into a component of the electorate that we have no idea is happening. That happened with Trump himself.
Yeah.
There were an entire class of people who really liked professional wrestling, and we didn't know anything about these people. And there they were in the ballot box, the voting booth on election day. So, yes, 100%. We used to talk about bias in the media. With 90% of it, it's just being complete propagandists. It's not biased. It's writing and repeating one side's talking points for them. And it's incredibly destructive at a deeper level than anybody appreciates yet.
Do you think that they want Trump back? I mean, if you think about the collapse in clicks and views on Biden's watch, it's been like a crater for the media. The Trump years were to quote a man we both admire, Robert Bartley, the four fat years for the media, right? And
Yeah.
are they? Do you think they secretly want him back because he'll bring their numbers back?
Yeah. If you think of the media in terms of the opposition, which it now is, it's always a little more prosperous being in the opposition. This used to be the case. It may no longer be the case. But there was a time when the only year that National Review made any money was the first year of Clinton's presidency. They actually made a profit, which is unusual for an intellectual magazine. Because, it's just more fun to be in the opposition. You don't have the responsibility of governing. You don't have to defend every mistake you make. You just have to criticize the mistake the other guy makes. So to the extent that the media has become the opposition, yes, it's more fun for them. They get more clicks. They don't make much money, but they probably lose less in most cases than they do when their side is in the majority. What they didn't appreciate was just the media, was just how much they destroyed their own credibility, and they'll never get so much of that audience back, which is too bad, but we'll have to work through it. So, yes.
That is 100% true. I mean, I had been disgruntled with the New York Times for many years, but I still used it as a source of news. But during the Trump administration, and I've never gone back.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'll read it if somebody sends it to me, but otherwise I'm in it for the cooking, the games, Wordle. So let me come back to a political question that is interesting. I find what you said about us not knowing the population and perhaps still not knowing the population very resonant because Amy Walter wrote this really interesting piece about converts, right? So how did Donald Trump win in 2016? Well, in part, Donald Trump won because people voted for Donald Trump because it was a big FU, right? But in part, he won because people were voting against Hillary Clinton. Amy notes that during Trump's tenure, like it, hate it, whatever, he managed to convert those voters, not simply from anti-Hillary, but into pro-Trump. And that Biden has not been able to do the same. In other words, there were a lot of people who voted for Biden in 2020 because they didn't want Donald Trump. They still don't want Donald Trump,
Right.
but they are not going to vote for Joe Biden again. And she notes this. And I think it suggests that there's a lot more going on in the public than we have a grasp of, even post 2016. What do you think? What do you think is behind it?
I didn't read the article, but my first thought is that Trump is funny and Joe Biden is just not. There's not anything remotely funny about him. Even when he was at his, on top of his game, he was more of sort of a weirdo blowhard, whereas Trump has an amazing sense of timing with his jokes. Years ago, I wrote a piece that I thought was sort of a weirdo, sort of off-base piece that I thought would be embarrassing, but people loved it. Trump has a way of, when he speaks, he will rearrange the words of his sentence so that in order to make the funny word the very last word in the sentence. And if you listen to him, he does that a lot. It's sort of a comedic timing thing. And I was at a rally of his in Conway, South Carolina, a couple of months ago, I guess. And I've been to them before. And, I'm a member of the media. I don't want to laugh. I'm supposed to sit there and stroke my chin and pay very close attention and write notes. And he was making me laugh. The thing that really got me was he said, I've been indicted more than Alphonse Capone. I don't know why he said Alphonse, but instead of Al, but it was just funny. And he's still funny, and Joe Biden is not. So that's my first thought. The other is that, just to repeat what we've already been talking about, the media and the Democratic political class was just so unbelievably unfair to Donald Trump, beyond anything we've ever seen in political life, even at its worst, that you couldn't help liking the guy. It's like some brat kid on the playground and you can't stand him, but if you see him getting kicked around by a bunch of bullies, you kind of have to take his side. And there was this weird psychology where you just felt sort of obliged to take the guy's side, even if you didn't like him. That's the other part. I don't know. But probably the biggest part is that Joe Biden is just beyond attracting anybody's sympathy. He seems at once sort of out of it, but also kind of mean and highly off-putting. But that, I'm not the one to judge because I don't like him anyway. There is something weird going on there in which Trump is able to retain people's sympathies and Biden isn't.
Well, I want to get back to the unfairness point, but on the humor, the other thing is it's not only is he funny, but they are so humorless. And they always keep falling for the trick. Like he goes on, at a Fox News town hall, and they ask him, "Are you going to be a dictator?" And he says, "Well, just for one day." And the whole audience laughs. Everybody knows it's a joke. And then they say, Trump admitted that he's going to be a dictator for a day, and they're outraged by it. It's just like, you people are just so stupid. It's like, what are you talking about? Why do you? And then people look at that, and not only is he funny and endearing, but they come across as so humorless and sort of setting their hair on fire over everything. So and if you're mildly concerned that he might have authoritarian tendencies, he's dissipated that by being funny about it while they're being not funny. It's as much their reaction as his humor that sort of endears him.
Yeah, what was it that I think Selena Zito famously said that Trump fans take him seriously but not literally, and the media takes him literally but not seriously. And the latter is inherently humorless. If you're going to take somebody literally without affording that person any legitimacy, that's just inherently humorless.
It is funny that we at once expect politics to be so performative, and it has become so performative, and yet we don't judge it by the same standards, right? I think you're right that it does make a connection with people that they generally appreciate. So I want to come back to this strategy that you wrote about in the journal piece. So we saw that worked pretty well, for example, for Adam Schiff, right? So he wanted to keep his main rival off the ballot. California has a jungle primary, and really, really an apt name too. As a jungle primary, he wanted to keep Katie Porter off, and so he did, right? And now, of course, he's going to win, slam dunk, hands down. There's no question that he's going to take that seat unless there's something that all of us don't understand about California politics. But at a certain point, does this stop working? Does this effort to manipulate the political environment stop working and people suddenly decide that they want to grab things back. There's a lot of conversation about problems with the primary system, right? That it, in fact, elevates marginal candidates, that it elevates marginal voters. There are problems all over our electoral system. There are debates mostly on the left about the Electoral College. Are we headed, without perhaps realizing it, to a revolt against the political system that we have? Or, she said, having watched the collapse of no labels, the absolutely ignominious collapse of no labels, are we just overestimating it? And people are just perfectly satisfied with the craptastic two-party system that we have. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency on the left to, as you say, they debate about the primary system more than Republicans do for a variety of reasons. So they have all these theories about how we can rearrange primaries. So, for example, we could like a jungle primary, which they don't. Interesting, liberals don't really like that term because they want it to be, because a jungle primary is not a partisan primary in the traditional sense. The listeners don't know, all the candidates go into one ballot, and whoever gets the first, second, or third, or whatever the rules are, get to be in the general election, even if they're all three Democrats or all three Republicans. So another reform is, what do you call it, ranked choice. And that's another really complicated one where you have to not only say who you want to vote for, but who's your second choice and your third choice and your fourth choice. And then there are different rounds and people get eliminated and no one knows what's going on. And eventually you
Like
wind up with some
Survivor.
candidate. Yeah, exactly. And you wind up with some winner, and only people who understand the primary system understand why they got it. To my mind, these are all attempts to address a problem caused by an excess of democracy, by piling on more democracy. I think that, so just to step back a second, there's an inherent problem with democracy, and that is who gets to be on the ballot. Democracy doesn't really answer that. And so we have a system of political parties and primaries to sort of decide who's on the ballot. Only in the 20th century did we start having everyone vote to put their favorite candidate on each party's ballot. And before that, parties decided who would be on the ballot. And people didn't like that because, it was like smoke-filled rooms and cigar-chomping party bosses deciding who got on the ballot. But that system had one advantage over our current system, and that is that the party bosses tended to know who was more electable and who was less electable. And so we got rid of that system, and now it's just a free-for-all. Anyone could vote in the primary, and a lot of times primary voters are really dumb about who is electable and who isn't. So as unrealistic as this is probably to say, I think at some point we will have to grapple with the fact that we need less democracy in our primary system rather than more, rather than trying to fix it with some, cockamamie system of ranked choice voting or whatever. We're just going to have to strengthen the parties in a way that will allow someone who knows what they're talking about to put an electable candidate on the ballot. That's not an answer that a lot of people will like, but at some point we have to grapple with that reality, to my way of thinking.
No, that's an extremely honest answer because, of course, right, we only discovered what we hated about the smoke-filled room when we got rid of the smoke-filled room and let inmates run the
Well, that's
asylum.
what the senatorial committee is doing now. I mean, that's what Steve Daines is doing at the senatorial committee, which in 2022, we just let the primary process play itself out and we got all these MAGA candidates nominated. And he was like, we're not doing that again. And so he actually has been intervening in primaries and getting more normal candidates elected. So I think there's a recognition of that.
Well, there's some, but note that we still have Kerry Lake in Arizona. But this is what's interesting to me. So coming back, you're exactly right that there are all these elaborate means of revolt that are meant to mitigate the problem, which in fact would be most easily solved by going back to a pretty straightforward system of letting people be in charge of it. Now, I mean, there is something anti-democratic about it nonetheless, but still, let's be frank about it. But let's just talk about this no labels thing. For me, every political podcast that Mark and I have done over the last year has made clear that 65% of Americans don't want a replay of 2020. They don't want Joe Biden and they don't want Donald Trump. Nonetheless, that 65% of Americans has ceded authority for how this should go forward to primary voters. And the primary voters have said, no, we love these guys. Everybody else hates them, but we love them. How is it possible that we have, in this environment, not been able to find a third-party candidate? Is it simply the bad structure of no labels? Is it simply that the American political system is so rigged that if you don't have party backing, you can't win? What's your theory about this?
Oh, you're asking me, huh? I'm supposed to know that?
Yeah,
I
I know.
haven't answered
I
that.
don't have one.
Oh, no.
I don't have one either.
Yeah, let's just take an example. Like, why wouldn't Joe Manchin run on a no labels candidacy? To my mind, he would make a pretty strong showing. I know a lot of Republicans who sort of like him, and there are probably a good number of Democrats who like him too. Why wouldn't he run? I suspect it was because politics has just become so unbelievably vicious in both media attacks, the whole activist sphere. Manchin was a guy who was followed around by activists and had insults constantly hurled at him during the debate over, what was that bill? I forgot what they called it. Build Back Better. I don't know. And so, he's just not going to put himself forward for that. For the same reason, I think that Joe Biden didn't run in 2016 because he didn't want to, not without reason, get run over by the Clinton machine. Things have become so vicious, so nasty that, more electable people won't put themselves in the middle of it, because if they end up losing, they'll be blamed by both sides and have to face all those consequences. So that's the best I can do. That's not a very good answer, but I am utterly puzzled about this whole mess. And it's why I've come to the whole smoke-filled rooms conclusion, really. The danger of the old smoke-filled rooms sort of Tammany Hall thing was that the official would get into office and then feel beholden to the party boss instead of the people. I'm willing to risk it. Let's go back to that.
Let's put Ron and McDaniel in charge of the country.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe that's not a perfect idea.
I'm not down with the whole party boss solution. Generally speaking, I think history is made, wars are won, presidential campaigns are won by force of individual leadership, right? We all look and say, well, the Carter years were terrible, and then 4 years later, Ronald Reagan came and it was morning in America again. Well, that's because Ronald Reagan showed up. He was a world historic figure. Why did no labels fizzle? Because nobody with the talent or courage stepped forward to seize the label. Ross Perot was a force of personality, and then then George Bush tried to disrupt his daughter's wedding, and he lost his courage for a little while. Or Teddy Roosevelt was a force of personality. And Donald Trump is a force of personality. That's why he's been able to lead a movement that's taken over the Republican Party. If you want another Ronald Reagan, we need to find another Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
That's the solution.
If you saw the American Masters PBS thing on William F. Buckley over the weekend.
I have not seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I saw it being criticized by National Review. That's all I saw.
And I was prepared to like it no matter what, but it was pretty hard to like, especially the second half of it. It just became, well, it was a usual thing. It was sort of conservatives as liberals understand them. They were kind of pro-segregation. They liked the Vietnam War. All the rest of it, they liked Joe McCarthy, every sort of canard you can think of. However, even so, watching that documentary reminded me of what a tremendous service Buckley did in coalescing the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Republicans hated each other just as much back then, it seems to me, or almost as much. And yet, through National Review and Firing Line and all the rest of it, they sort of figured out ways to live with each other. And it was into that environment that Reagan entered. Maybe even if we had a Reagan to show up, everybody would just go to war with each other again. So I don't know why I brought that up, other than to say, do we also have another William F. Buckley?
Yeah, my favorite story is when Jim Buckley was elected to the Senate and he said, "I am the new politics," and Buckley's response was, "La nouvelle politique, c'est goddamn well moi." Yeah, no, but the Buckley and National Review and Reagan, they were the insurgency, and now all of us who sort of have our political roots in that period, we're the Rhinos.
Yeah, right. Rhinos.
Maybe we are. I mean, maybe we don't really know what Republican means to everybody anymore. Donald Trump has very successfully redefined the Republican Party, and I think for a lot of people, well, people like me, I won't include the two of you. People like me in Washington, it's a question of can we wrestle back the party? And when I'm asked that, what is my strategy to wrestle back the party? I don't have one.
Yeah, nor do
It's
I.
true.
Nor do I. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wrestle back, yes and no. I mean, there's some things there's some changes that he's brought around that are pretty good. I think representing the working class instead of the corporate interest is a positive, in more ways than not a positive thing. It's not all bad. It'll shake itself out at some point. New leaders will emerge. I mean, I actually worry the bigger fight is going to be post-Trump. I think that, you just look at foreign policy, Trump is not an isolationist, but you know what? JD Vance is. Josh Hawley is. It's going to be a lot of the Trump movement without Trump's charm and without Trump's flexibility. There's going to be this movement of ideologues who think that they're carrying on the MAGA movement, and he's much more ideological, flexible, and willing to compromise and willing to cut deals and listen to advice than they are. I'd be much more worried about 4 years of JD Vance than I would be at 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Nikki Haley's real problem was that she was too little of an ideologue. She just didn't have a coherent political message that she really needed to form, and she had plenty of time to do it, but it still was just, hey, look at me, I am normal, I am not Trump, but that was almost it. I believe in traditional Republican things, but somebody is going to have to formulate a coherent message on the right in order to give these ideologues a go.
Do you have somebody who you like?
I do not.
That's the problem. You know what my boss used to say? My boss used to say, you can't beat something with nothing. And that's the biggest problem we have.
All the people I like are leaving.
Yeah.
They're quitting and not running.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't run who I thought might.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? And that tells you something as well. Maybe all is not as well as people think in the Republican Party either. Oy vey. Well, this has been completely uplifting.
Yeah, what a mess. Yeah.
Whenever we need a boost in spirit, we'll bring you back on.
Yeah, no kidding. I feel A, like a rhino, B, without really strong ideas about how to fix everything, and C, depressed about the future. So, A, amazing. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care. So, Danny, I'm even more depressed now than I was at the start of this podcast because I've been bemoaning the fact that we don't have another Ronald Reagan, and Barton has pointed out that we also don't have another William F. Buckley Jr. who enabled the rise of Ronald Reagan, and we also don't have another Jesse Helms who helped Ronald Reagan win in North Carolina and kept his political hopes alive because all the good people are quitting Congress. This conversation was supposed to be about how bad the Democrats are and how they really love Trump. And as always, it's turned back to how bad the Republicans are. What the hell is going on?
Look, I do think that it is a good quality that we have, that we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make the party better.
Because they don't.
The fact that we're still thinking about it and haven't really got any amazing ideas is perhaps somewhat problematic. But this is what the conversations need to be. And I worry about us. There was an official who I will not name on our side of the aisle who really rested his career on the idea that the bad guys would always screw up. In other words, we don't have to have a good North Korea policy. We don't have to have a good Iran policy because no matter what our policy is, they'll always screw up and enable us to stop the train, stop the six-party talks, stop the JCPOA. I worry that we are becoming the political equivalent of that guy, which is to say that the Democrats are always going to screw up so badly, overreach so badly, that we're just going to end up still voting Republican. That's a really bad reason. You want to vote Republican or Democrat for that matter because you have hope, because these people have solutions to the problems that plague us. And when I look at what I see on offer, set aside all the things I hate about Donald Trump, set aside the history. What I don't see is how we're going to make our immigration system better. How are we actually going to fix our tax system? How are we actually going to fix our education system? These are real challenges that I don't think that we have offered up great answers to, and I wish that
I
we could do more.
disagree.
Okay,
I
go.
disagree with you. So on the immigration point, you're absolutely right because we're very divided on that. And there's a flood and talking about, literally like stopping a disaster. But on education, we know the answer. It's school choice. And we've got great governors across the country who are doing this. We got Kim Reynolds in Iowa who literally challenged the teachers union Republicans and got them primaried and beat them and passed the most comprehensive school choice law in the country. And Governor Abbott has done the same thing in Texas now, where he challenged all the Republicans who are stopping school choice. So we've got solutions on that. Under Trump, we passed the first comprehensive tax reform in 3 decades since Ronald Reagan.
It's about to expire.
I know, because we had to do it under reconciliation. And so those things, you can't do anything permanent. It expires. That's part of the problem. So I think we have plenty of good solutions. But I think you're right that we are depending too much on the idea that because Joe Biden is such a disaster, that we're going to win. We can just ride that to the White House. I talk about this on Fox all the time. He's the most unpopular president in the history of presidential polling. The day we're recording this, at the same time in his presidency, Donald Trump was 7 points more popular than Joe Biden is today, according to the 538 average.
Mark, we got a note from a very well-known pollster that told us that, in fact, us saying that is wrong. Harry Truman at a certain point was at 25%.
At a certain point, but not now. I'm telling you, you go on the 538
at that point. Okay.
No, I'm talking about on any given day. No, there were points where Harry Truman was slightly less popular than him. But as you go now, there was a period of time where Donald Trump was still the most unpopular president ahead of Joe Biden, and now it's changed. If you look at the 538 average today, you can actually go to, I think today is day 1,172, and you can literally pick the day and show where every president was going back to Harry Truman. So he is the most unpopular president. He's underwater by double digits on every single issue. Double digits. And 86% of the country thinks he's too old for a second term. And yet, if you go to the RCP average today, Donald Trump is up by 1.1 points in the RCP average, right? There was that swing state poll that just came out from the Wall Street Journal where he was leading in 6 of the 7 swing states, in most cases within the margin of error. I mean, if Joe Biden is this unpopular, we should be running away with it. But we're not, because Joe Biden is the most unpopular president in history, but only slightly ahead of the previous record holder, who is the Republican nominee. When people are forced to make a choice, like you point out, where 65% of people don't want this choice, they don't want a rematch. When you're forced to choose between two people who you don't want, you may be surprised who they end up choosing. Yeah. It's a binary choice, and people are going to go to the voting booth and they're going to choose, and people who don't like Joe Biden are going to vote for Joe Biden, and people who don't like Donald Trump are going to vote for Donald Trump. It could go either way.
So to quote Mark Thiessen, if you are still with us at this point in our podcast, it means you really like us. And so perhaps you would like to join us for our 250th episode recording.
Yes.
It will be live. We're releasing this on Thursday morning. That is Thursday, the 11th of April. And it will be live on Thursday morning at, oh my God, what time? No, it won't. That's a lie. It will be live on Thursday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. If you're in town, do register for the event. It's on.
Come over to AEI and meet us and our guests. We're going to have Amy Walter and Matt Continenti talking about the Trump-Biden rematch. So similar to what we've been talking about at the end of this podcast, we'll continue the conversation with them. And you can meet them in person and tolerate us. And if you can't make it, that episode will be out next week.
Terrific. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.